Good morning, everybody. What's happening? We've got a little bit of a Stokastic MLB Strategy Show, 13-game baseball slate today, and running the gamut. We've got some high-end stacks. We got a Coors Field game. We've got some stud pitchers, Garrett Cole, Justin Verlander on the mound. So a lot of different decision points to make. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, if you want access to all the tools we have on the site, which are going to be imperative for these big baseball slates, all tools that I use to help build my MLB lineups, you can sign up for the first time using the promo code MLB Strategy Show, and that is going to give you 50% off a Stokastic Plus Platinum Pass. It's going to get you access to all the tools we have for baseball, as well as access to all the tools for basically every single DFS sport out there. And whatever it is you're looking for, whether it's player projections, ownership projections, all the tools we have for baseball, and much more. Once again, get those right now, signing up using the promo code MLB Strategy Show, and that's going to get you 50% off your first week of a Stokastic Plus Platinum Pass. I'm also excited for the show today because I'm working with Chris Pennell, who, I mean, we've been in the Slack streets together at the company through name changes, through all kinds of stuff, and we never crossed paths before. But Chris, you and I are doing a show together. Are you as excited for it as I am?
I'm hoping so. It should be a good one. I've always seen you on here and have not had the pleasure to do a show with you yet. So it should be a good one. It's a fun slate to do it. Just a fair warning to everyone, I'm pretty sick today, so hopefully I don't sound too rough through the show today, but we should be able to power through it.
See, I mean, to me, I don't know what you normally sound like. So to me, it's just, this is what Chris Pennell sounds like. And by the way, I've never seen this before. Sean V is in YouTube chat early in the morning to take an L. Usually, no matter how poorly his takes go, he victory laps in the morning anyway. Not today. Sean V, big L on the Dodgers. Yeah, the Dodgers, I think he capped them at 4 runs was the max they could score yesterday. They ended up scoring a little bit more than 4. We got another game where they have a fairly decent matchup. The Dodgers today against Chad Kuhl. We'll be hitting on that a little bit later on the show, but where we are going to be starting, it's in New York. It is the New York Yankees against the Kansas City Royals. And when we talk about bad pitchers, I mean, Chris Bubich is as bad as they really get. He has a 5.72 expected ERA, a 17.7% K rate. And one thing that has happened on the slate with a lot of the ownership going towards Coors Field, nothing else is really all that popular. We've got 2 teams that are picking up double-digit ownership. It's the Dodgers, and they're at around 30% right now. And then we've got the Cardinals at about 12% projected ownership as a team. Nothing else is all that popular. So, Chris, where are the Yankees going to fit in with the other teams you're looking to stack today?
I definitely think Coors Field really helps a lot of teams be good GPP spots today, and I think the Yankees are right up there with it. I mean, they get a great spot versus Bubich, who you just talked about, has not been great this year. 4.7 xFIP, the K rate's below 20%, the walk rate's sitting at 12%, giving up around a 200 ISO this year. Hard contact. I mean, obviously no Giancarlo Stanton still, but this is still a great lineup. You have DJ LeMahieu, the best hitter in baseball, Aaron Judge, Anthony Rizzo. I'm even fine with using lefty on lefty here for tournaments. Torres, Donaldson, obviously have been intending now. Wouldn't expect him to lead off versus a lefty, but I mean, I'm all for the Yankees in tournaments, and obviously I love the Yankees side for the pitching as well.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where Benintendi ends up fitting into the mix now against left-hand pitcher. Is he going to be a platoon guy? I think when Giancarlo Stanton gets back, that's more likely to happen. Probably less so right now. But yeah, you said he's probably not going to lead off, which I agree. I tend to think he isn't going to lead off like he did yesterday. We'll see where he lands in the batting order and what the Yankees lineup looks like overall with him now being added to the mix, them going up against the lefty for the first time since he got back. As far as the Yankees, I'm on the same page as you. I think this is a fairly high priority team to get to. Not sure it'd be that much different than the field. 8% ownership, around 8% top stack odds, but it still warrants them being one of the teams that we're getting some of the more exposure to on the slate. And then as for the pitcher for the Yankees, it's Garrett Cole, and he is the stone cold chalk at pitcher. And for good reason. This Royals offense already wasn't good, and now it's significantly worse. Benintendi not in the mix, more pieces likely to be headed out over the next week before the trade deadline. And Cole strikes out a lot of hitters, 32.3% K rate. I think everybody knows to play Garrett Cole. That's not really too much of a debate. In cash games, you're playing Garrett Cole on both FanDuel and DraftKings on single pitcher sites. But where does Garrett Cole stack up for you against Justin Verlander in tournaments? Because I kind of think that's the comparison point, is when we're considering ownership, Chris, how high of a priority for you is Garrett Cole going to be when he's projected to be nearly 50% of the field's lineups? Do you envision yourself being over or underweight to the field to him?
So me personally, I'm more willing to go overweight on chalky pitchers than I am chalky offenses because pitchers are obviously a lot more projectable. But I am looking at the top pitchers tool for the slate so far, and obviously ownership is going to change throughout the day. But Garrett Cole's pulling in some of the worst negative leverage on the slate. If you compare him to a player like Justin Verlander, he actually shows a little bit of positive leverage. The thing is, though, you're kind of sacrificing some strikeouts here and there. Obviously, Verlander sitting at 26, 27% of the season, Garrett Cole in the low 30s. And obviously, it's a great matchup versus the Kansas City Royals and a great spot to pick up a win and just have a fantastic game. So I'm fine going overweight on Garrett Cole. I realize the leverage isn't there currently. The ownership's going to be high, but I'm more willing to go overweight on chalky pitchers. I'm not sure if you have the same stance as I would.
Yeah, in general, the chalky offenses to me are typically where I'll tend to deviate. Oh, yesterday I just ended up playing a bunch of the Dodgers, and something that will happen a lot that I'll kind of gauge in chat at times is there will be times where something is projected or an offense or pitcher to be really popular, and there'll be a lot of pushback from chat. Like yesterday with the Dodgers, and not to single out any individual people, one guy is taking his L here in YouTube chat. But there was a surprising amount of people that were very anti-Dodgers yesterday, and they ended up coming in much lower owned than expected. They were still the most popular team on the slate, but I mean, their projected aggregate ownership was like 35% and ended up being around 20%. And I was kind of getting that sense we were doing live before live because nobody seemed to want to play the Dodgers. So anyway, in terms of offense, there's a lot more variability. Whereas pitchers just generally tend to be pretty solid. Like somebody like Shohei Ohtani. Ohtani scored over 20 fantasy points, I don't know, every start in 2 months in a row or something like that. So I saw Ohtani yesterday at a cheap price point. I knew he was going to be popular, but I kind of felt like I still had to play him anyway. Garrett Cole, still, I think he's fine to get to at his current ownership, although I am pretty interested in pivoting some of those lineups to Justin Verlander. If Verlander is going to actually be a fourth of the ownership by the time we get closer to lock, because while I think Garrett Cole is safer than Verlander, I don't think he outscores him 4-1 in terms of what the current split is in the ownership. So that's a pivot that I think I would like to make later in the day, just in terms of over the course of 150 lineups, maybe getting to more Verlander than Garrett Cole. But individually, I think Cole's well worth the ownership he's picking up. Next game on this. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, this is one of those slates where there's so many aces. I mean, we have Brandon Woodruff, we have Shane Bieber, Alek Manoah, Justin Verlander. So I don't think going crazy on Garrett Cole, some slates will see Garrett Cole on an island where he's the clear-cut ace. This is one of those slates where I do think it would be fine to differentiate if you want to, for sure.
Yeah, big slate, lots of pitchers, 13-game slates. So there's always going to be a lot of options. Also, people in the YouTube chat are asking about weather concerns. There's nothing that's too problematic for me right now. Maybe, once again, stuff could change later on in the day. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the MLB Deeper Dive and Live Before Lock, because maybe stuff will look worse. But at least as of now, I don't see any games that are really at risk of being canceled or anything like that. But the next spot we have to talk about, this is one of the ones that could potentially have rain issues. As of right now, though, it does look okay to me. St. Louis Cardinals, Washington Nationals. Anibal Sanchez is on the mound for the Nats. And Sanchez's numbers have not been terrible so far this year. He's a sub-3 expected ERA, a 22% K rate. I find it hard to believe any of this is going to hold up, though, because Sanchez has been washed up for a pretty considerable amount of time. Sanchez last year didn't pitch in the big leagues. In 2020, he had a 6.62 ERA and a 5.52 expected ERA. And then you also consider the age of Sanchez. He's 38 years old. His velocity is down quite a bit from when he was actually a good starting pitcher in baseball. So I don't know what you do with some of these pitchers when we have a limited sample size on them, but everything tells me that Sanchez going forward is not going to be a good pitcher. I like to look at Zips and Steamer projections. They have him as a guy who's going to be around a 5 ERA guy for the rest of the year. So as far as the Cardinals go, I think it's a good spot for them, but a little bit too much ownership for me right now. Projected for 12.5% ownership, one of the more negatively leveraged offenses on the slate. So what do you make of Anibal Sanchez's start to the year? And then how do you like the Cardinals against them at negative leverage?
Yeah, as far as Anibal Sanchez is concerned, I'm right there with you. I just don't think he's a good pitcher. He's old. He's obviously way past his prime. And the Cardinals, not an easy spot to navigate. I mean, you have Dylan Carlson up top. Tyler O'Neill's got plenty of pop. And then you have the gauntlet of Goldschmidt and Arenado, then Gorman Edman. This is not a spot where I'd want to roster Anibal Sanchez. We have one of the higher implied run totals on the slate for the Cardinals here north of 5. But like you were saying, I was pretty surprised how much ownership they were pulling in. I figured they'd be a decent stack today, but Curly coming in as the second highest owned stack, maybe that changes a little bit. I thought for sure it'd be the Dodgers and the Braves versus Bumgarner. Then the Yankees would obviously get some ownership, but I'm a little concerned at the ownership that they have currently, but I'm still willing to get to them a little bit. But that does make it a little bit more off-putting in tournaments. Obviously, grab a couple bats in cash, I think would be fine. But yeah, 150 max, it's a little scary in the ownership, but it's certainly a spot that I would look to target still.
Yeah, so what's really driving the ownership, it just looks like some of the price tags
Right.
because I do think it looks like the pricing algorithm, particularly on DK, is a little bit messed up by the strong starts of the year to the strong starts of the year for Anibal Sanchez, and just kind of considering like, oh, I guess this is a good starting pitcher per the algorithm here, because then we've got like Tommy Edman is 4K, Dylan Carlson 4,100, then you got guys like Dylan Carlson is only, Corey Dickerson is min price. So there's a bunch of really cheap hitters in the lineup. Brendan Donovan, another one, sub 3K. So I think that's what's kind of messing up some of the pricing here is just that Anibal Sanchez is not giving up a lot of runs to this point, and the pricing algorithm is detecting this as, hey, this is a tough matchup for the Cardinals. When neither you nor I think that is the actual scenario. But with that said, too much ownership for me on St. Louis as of now. And the other side of the game, Miles Michaelis going up against the Nationals. The Nationals offense outside of Juan Soto, it's fairly weak, and there's a good chance that they're not going to have Juan Soto in a week. And then we've got Miles Michaelis, who's pitched fairly well this year, but doesn't have that much K upside, only a 19.4% K rate. So here's how I view this matchup. Michaelis is good enough to where I don't want to stack the Nationals at all, but he also doesn't have enough strikeout upside to really compete with some of the other high-end arms on the slate. So no interest in me for the Cardinals pitcher Michaelis or the Nationals offense. Do you see it any differently?
No, I feel like every single show I do, Michaelis is on the slate, and I say the same exact thing each and every single time. He's a good real life pitcher, but for DFS purposes, he's not someone I typically get to. I mean, close to $9,000 for Michaelis. I'd much rather. There's plenty of other pitchers on this slate with more strikeout upside, like Shane Bieber, similar price point, Robbie Ray, even though his matchup's not great. And even then, the Nationals obviously not a great team, but they don't strike out that much either. So you're pairing a sub 20% K rate pitcher with a sub 20% K rate team versus righties. It just doesn't feel that appealing to me, close to $9,000.
Yeah, and that's, 13 game slates. We're going to have to start to find spots where it's like no interest here, no interest here. And that's going to be one of them for me.
Right.
Next spot, and this is another one that I kind of find it hard to have interest in, Philadelphia Phillies, Pittsburgh Pirates. Jose Quintana's on the mound for Pittsburgh. He's been serviceable this year. 4.18 expected ERA, 20.7% K rate. And then we have Bailey Falter on the mound for Philadelphia. And he's just sucked this year, 5.79 expected ERA, K rate also low at sub 20%. But I don't really want to make a habit of stacking the Pirates offense on a slate of this size. So I think Quintana's kind of been solid enough to where I don't really want to get to the Phillies, but I don't want to play Quintana either. So this is another game that I don't really think I'm going to have interest in my player pool. Is there anything that stands out to you from this Phillies and Pirates matchup?
Just absolutely nothing. I mean, this is just a pretty mediocre game overall. Like there's no chance I'm rostering Bailey Falter on a 13 game slate, and Quintana's been good, but not good enough to where I really want to roster him versus Philly. Like a 3.7 xFIP's fine, 20% carry, it's fine for the price, but I'm not going to be picking on Philly on this slate. There's many other spots I'd rather get to. So this is basically a cross-up game for me. If you wanted to get to Matt Verling up top at 2K, sure, but even then it doesn't feel good.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. And this is one of those other spots. No real interest. I think we can move past it. And always good to make up some time on a 13 game slate when we have some games where it's like, yeah, let's talk about this one for 90 seconds and then move on.
Right.
Next one, Detroit Tigers and the Toronto Blue Jays. The Blue Jays have one of the higher implied team totals on the slate, nearly 6 runs at home against Brian Garcia. What do you know about Garcia? This is going to be his season debut. We haven't seen him pitch at all this year. If we look at some of his previous years, also pretty limited sample sizes. He's never made a start in the big leagues. He's only pitched a total of 67 innings. Is this going to be a bullpen game for the Tigers?
Yeah, I would not expect much here out of Garcia. And I was looking at some of his 2022 numbers in AAA. It's not been pretty so far. 6.9 K per 9. His xFIP's currently sitting at 5.6. I can't expect him to last long, even if he was going to go deep. The Blue Jays should be able to get to him quite quickly. Like you said, one of the higher implied run totals on the slate, currently sitting at north of 5.5 currently. It depends what sites you're looking at, but we have him pretty high, and I don't see a reason to want to target him versus the Blue Jays offense, especially in a hitter's park. You have Toppy up top, Vlad, Kirk, Bichette, Teoscar Hernandez. Like, it's just a gauntlet of a lineup here in one spot where I just don't think Garcia is going to be able to have the skill set to get the job done here.
Yeah, and then something else too that I think we should consider when it comes to the Blue Jays offense, The Tigers also went with a semi bullpen game yesterday where they had Alexander starting. And I'm just going to pull up the bullpen numbers really quick while I'm talking through this. And Alexander, it's not like he was an opener, only pitched 1 inning, but he only went 4 innings. And then the Tigers used some of their high leverage bullpen arms in that game because it was fairly competitive. And while the Tigers do have a really solid bullpen, right around 3 ERA and a FIP right around 3 as well, one of the better bullpens in the American League. After they only got 4 innings out of their starter yesterday and had to use Cisnero, DeJesus, and Vest out of the bullpen, this could be a bullpen that's a little bit exhausted. Back-to-back bullpen games, it's a little concerning for me. And that's actually why I think the Blue Jays are a pretty solid team to get overweight to the field to, despite the fact that bullpen games are not something I really like to target. You get to a point where the bullpen just gets exhausted, which I think could be where the Tigers are at right now. So only 5% expected ownership to go to the Blue Jays as a team. And that is a mark that I would like to be overweight to in tournaments.
Yeah, and they actually do have a little bit of positive leverage there. Because if you're looking at the other top stacks in the slate, the Dodgers, the Cardinals, the Braves, and Yankees, they're all showing negative leverage on this slate. So, Toronto Blue Jays are one of the, the top stacks was on the higher totals that are still showing some positive leverage. So I love that spot for tournaments.
Yeah, so I think we're on the same page there. And then as for Garcia, I get he's cheap, but he's probably only pitching an inning or two. So hard to really take him seriously at all. But Alek Manoah, I think, has to be considered one of the better pitching options on the slate. He's been great this year. His strikeout numbers, maybe a little bit lower than what would have been anticipated coming into the year, but still 23% K rate. The expected ERA is 3 flat. And then if we look at the ownership going to him right now, crazy low for the matchup he's in, and also a fairly reasonable price point. So we're getting Manoah at $9,400 on DK, only projected for 13% ownership. Over on FanDuel, he's projected for 5% ownership at $10,200. I know we have a lot of options to consider at the top end of the pricing range. There's Justin Verlander, there's Garrett Cole, there's Shane Bieber. I think Manoah should be picking up more ownership here. What do you make of where he's at?
My thesis on why the ownership's a little bit lower is because people are looking at that lower strikeout rate compared to some of the other top end aces on the slate. Like Garrett Cole was at 32%. You have Woodruff at 30%. Even Blake Snell is close to 30%. And there's some other guys that are pretty close to 30% as well. 23%, you always want a little bit more at that price point, but I think the matchup can make up for that. But Manoah's numbers on the season, a 3.8 xFIP, 23% K rate, not walking many guys, doesn't give him much power. I wouldn't say it's the best park to pitch him, but I think he can overcome that obviously versus Detroit. Because if you're looking at their numbers versus righties this season, it's pretty putrid. A 24% K rate. They're not walking at all. An ISO right around 167 WRC plus. So even though Manoah doesn't have quite the strikeout upside of some of these other pitchers, the matchup's plus for him to where I think he can kind of make up for that.
Yeah, and then something else about that Tigers offense, because you mentioned that WRC plus, it's impossibly low at this point in the season.
Right.
I can't remember us being to, each team's played about 100 games, and the Tigers WRC plus, like it's about 60% of what the league averages at creating runs. So this is the easiest matchup any pitcher could possibly get, is a right-hand pitcher going up against the Detroit Tigers. And we've got a really good one in Alek Manoah, who's an all-star this year, deservedly so, and just isn't picking up that much ownership. So I do like Alek Manoah quite a bit in tournaments. And later on, we're talking about the Dodgers and what to do with them in large field tournaments with all their ownership. I would have Alek Manoah circled as a pitcher to roster in some of those Dodgers lineups to potentially try to reduce ownership share. So I like Manoah in tournaments quite a bit. Next game to talk about, Boston Red Sox, Milwaukee Brewers. And I want to know what your stance is on Brian Bayo, or if you even have a strong one at all, because he's considered one of the, if not the top pitching prospect in baseball. And he's been miserable so far at the big leagues. His stuff is clearly good. He's got a sinker, moves a whole bunch, it generates swing and misses. He's touching 98, 99 miles per hour, but 4.6 expected ERA, 14.1% K rate. This is never good. You open up the DraftKings app and you click on Brian Bayo, go, oh, look, he's averaging negative fantasy points per game. Not something you ever want to see out of your starting pitcher. I don't think we could consider rostering Bayo on a slate of this size, but has he been bad enough? And do you think that he's going to continue to struggle at the big league level to the point where we want to look at the Brewers as a stack?
Yeah, I can definitely get to the Brewers today. And yes, I know the upside should be there for Bayo in the future. And I don't think he's going to be this bad going forward. But right now, he's been struggling so far. It's a very small sample size of around 12 innings. But in the xFIP's close to 5, the K rate and walk rate are both pretty close to each other in the low teens there. The one thing I will say he's been doing good at is just getting a lot of ground balls. That's currently sitting at 60%, but it's not a pitcher-friendly park in Fenway. And the Brewers, I mean, they have a team total right around 5 today, and I could definitely get to them. I mean, there's plenty of guys with some pop there. Christian Yelich, Willie Adames, Roddy Tellez, I like quite a bit for a home run guy. Andrew McCutcheon, Hunter Renfroe, prefer them versus lefties. But I think the Brewers stack's not bad today. The price points aren't terrible, and obviously going to be much lower than Coors Field.
Yeah, I didn't check. So one thing I actually have been doing is I've been betting the over on strikeout props for Brian Bayo. Believe it or not, it's been going well because the numbers have been set so low. I think the expectation is just like, oh, this guy sucks. And then, actually, so he's gone 1-1. Never mind. I thought it was a little. He's gone 1-1 in strikeout props in his last 2 games, but it's been set at like 2.5 and 3.5 have been his strikeout props. Let me see what it is today. Kind of
Price Picks has him at 4.
That's a little more reasonable.
Yeah.
Let's see, where do books have him at 3.5? That's pretty low. Where do we have him projected? Let's see if we have this up yet. If we have Brian Bayo projected for even 4 strikeouts, I'm probably betting the over on that number. It's never going to feel great about it because of how shitty he's been, but it's a 3.5 strikeout prop for a pitcher who clearly has a whole bunch of talent. All right, I'm opening up Odd Shopper right now. Let's see what comes up. Click on the Boston Red Sox. We've got our strikeout props up. Brian Bayo.
We have him at 4.8.
All right, so I like the over. I like the over there. Then I mean, 3.5 strikeout prop. It's so low. He could get his ass kicked again. Like he could have the same start he had against the Rays 2 starts ago. He pitched 4 innings, gave up 5 runs, had 5 strikeouts, and he hit the strikeout prop pretty easily. I also bet the alternate lines in that game. If I remember correctly, it was 2.5 was the over. So I had like 4+, 5+. So it was like, it was cashing 5 strikeouts for Brian Bayo at like plus 250 or something that game. Yeah. I'm probably going to bet the over on Brian Bayo's strikeouts and expect him to get his ass kicked, but still think there's a pretty good chance he gets the over on his strikeouts. So that's something I think that you guys should go bet right now. It's a bet that does make sense, regardless of what you think of Brian Bayo and the success he may or may not have tonight against the Brewers. That's an individual bet I like. And then we've got Brandon Woodruff starting for the Brewers. It's been a weird season for him. Overall, his numbers are good at this point. They've normalized 3.16 expected ERA, strikeout rate back over 30%. Early in the year, he had the issue where he had some arm soreness, and then he had some weird syndrome where he lost feeling in his fingers and couldn't throw his off-speed pitches and had to take some time off. But now everything's looking good for him. He's going up against a Red Sox team that doesn't have Devers. He's on the injured list. And then in addition, the Red Sox just all kinds of struggles since the All-Star break and now looking like a team that could be sellers at the trade deadline. How do you feel about Woodruff as a potential contrarian pitching option where, we mentioned a lot of other guys that potentially could make sense to pay up to be contrarian with? Well, Brandon Woodruff is projected for 3% ownership on DK. On FanDuel, he's projected for less than 1% ownership. A lot of guys to choose from. Is Woodruff going to be one of them for you?
Yeah, I mean, if he's going to be that low today, I think you have to get overweight for a pitcher with a 30% K rate this season. The other numbers look very solid as well. 3.26 xFIP. The walks are above 7%, but I'm not overly concerned about that. Low power numbers given up, not as many ground balls as some other guys. But I think Woodruff's in a spot where if he's going to be that low owned, I don't love the park that he's pitching in, but with no Rafael Devers, that's definitely a big hit to the Boston lineup, having a power lefty versus a guy like Brandon Woodruff. So, I mean, in tournaments, he's someone I certainly want to get to. And looking at the top pitchers tool, as far as leverage is concerned, he is currently 4th best in that regard. So, I mean, tournaments, I definitely want to get to Woodruff.
Yeah. Cash games, no consideration there. There's just safer options. And, even if the Red Sox have struggled a little bit as of late, we've got other aces that are in easier matchups than Woodruff is going up against in Boston. But Woodruff in large field tournaments, I think he makes sense to have more than 1% of on FanDuel, makes sense to have more than 3% of on DK. And another ace to talk about in the next game here, Cleveland Guardians, Tampa Bay Rays, Shane Bieber, who I've been a little bit lower on this year than a lot of other of the high-end arms. Bieber last year had shoulder surgery, missed a large bulk of the season, and just the velocity isn't the same anymore. Down about 2 miles per hour from the last time we saw him healthy. As a result, he's still been good this year. Like, I don't want to make it seem like he hasn't been a good pitcher, but he's a 3.73 expected ERA, a 24.3% K rate. It's just not the same pitcher from the past. And we have a lot of high-end pitchers on the slate. A lot of them are under-owned. I can't get exposure to all of them. And I actually think the 6% ownership for Shane Bieber over on FanDuel and then all the way up to 21% on DraftKings it's just a little bit much for me. I'd rather play some of the guys like Alek Manoah, for instance, who's around the same price, but is also has half the ownership.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think if you are playing cash games, Shane Bieber is an SP2 option's fine. Like, there's several reasons to like him today. FanDuel is a really tough price point to get to at 10.6, but on DraftKings as an SP2 option, I think it's fine. You're in a pitcher-friendly park in Tampa. They'll strike out quite a bit versus right-handed pitching. And while Bieber isn't the same guy anymore, that does, fortunately enough, reflect on the pricing over on DK. It's still a 3.3 xFIP, 24.5% K rate. Still is a good control pitcher, only a 5% walk rate this season, not giving up too much power. And like I said, the Rays lineup isn't that impressive. Obviously, you have Brandon Lau back these days, but even then, I would still give the advantage to Shane Bieber here over the Rays offense. So I think he might be a little bit overowned. Cash games, fine SP2. But like you said, I think getting to Alek Manoah at much lower ownership and a much better matchup is definitely a strong way to go as well as a pivot.
Yeah, so I think we're on the same page. I'm actually surprised how much ownership Bieber's picking up, over 20% on DK.
Yeah.
It seems a lot for me for a road matchup. And I know Tampa Bay, pitcher friendly park and all that, but still, that's a big number for me. And then on the other side of the game, it is Jeffrey Springs on the mound for Tampa Bay. Crazy enough, he's nearly identical numbers to Bieber this year. Bieber, 3.73 expected ERA. Jeffrey Springs, 3.73 expected ERA. Strikeout rate for Bieber, 24.3%. Strikeout rate for Springs, 26.3%. He also has a lower whip. So they've been similar to maybe even marginally better on the spring side of the game. He's also at home going up against the Cleveland Guardians. The Rays are favored in this game. Only a 3.5 team total for the Guardians in this spot. With all that in mind, how do you view Springs as a pitching option?
Yeah, Springs is interesting in tournaments because if you're looking at the Guardians splits this season versus right-handed pitching and left-handed pitching, obviously they don't strike out much versus either, but versus righties are striking out 17.5% of the time, but versus lefties, it's up to 21%. And their overall numbers are much worse versus left-handed pitching. Only a 76 WRC plus 102 ISO and a 7.9% walk rate. So while the Guardians aren't really a team I pick on too much, Springs is kind of come in at some decent low ownership today below 8K. I don't mind it. I mean, like you said, I'm looking at my spreadsheet, very similar numbers to Shane Bieber, and he's $1,000 cheaper and not going to have quite the ownership either.
Yeah, so another spot here where I think we could look at a contrarian pitching option because there's very low ownership going to Springs. 7% over on DK. FanDuel is projected for 5% ownership. He's sub 8K on both sites. I think he's if you were to take ownership out of the equation and just look at prices, I think you make a case that Springs the better pitcher to get to than Bieber. And then you consider Bieber's got, 3x the ownership going to him. And by the way, Tyler, what is going on your screen over there? You're like spazzing out. All right, whatever.
I'm being contacted again. No, I'm being contacted by aliens right now. I don't know what's happening, man.
Yeah, do you see it? Do you see that? Do you see that, Chris?
Oh, I see it. It's kind
of I'm looking at the corner of my screen.
Man.
His entire thing is bugging me out. He's like he's gonna give me a seizure. I feel like a 8-year-old kid watching the Pokemon episode that got banned. His entire screen is bad. Nobody knows what I'm talking about that isn't watching, but his entire screen is glitching while we're doing this out of the corner of my eye. It's driving me nuts. All right, next game to talk about. But quick shout out to our sponsor, Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. If you are signing up at Prize Picks for the first time, you get $100 added to your account just by signing up using the promo code AWESEMO. It's the easiest way to make money in any of this industry, whether it's DFS, sports betting. You take advantage of the sign-up offers, and that's what they got going on over at Prize Picks. $100 added to your account to help build that bankroll, and then also use the tools we have over at Stokastic.com, like our player projections, and then also our player props projections over at OddsShopper. Just really easy stuff to compare to and find the best props to build cards with over a Prize Pick. So go check out that to make some money and then make some additional money signing up using that promo code AWESEMO and get that bankroll built up. All right, next game here on the slate, it is the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Atlanta Braves. And I'm kind of curious to see how people are going to view the Braves in this spot as we get closer to lock, because Bumgarner's numbers, to be honest, they're better this year than what I was expecting them to be. And that's not saying all that much because I set the bar so low, but a 4.79 expected ERA, 17.3% K rate. He has maintained an ERA right around 4, but the Braves have an offense that they have a lot of right-handed firepower in it. They could do damage against lefties. So I do view this as a spot where we could see Madison Bumgarner look more like his peripheral numbers than what his actual ERA has been. But then also right now we've got 8% projected ownership going to the Braves. So I'm curious to see what that number looks like closer to lock. I think it could come down just because of the name value associated with Bumgarner. But how do you like this spot overall for the Braves offense against him?
Yeah, I like the Braves quite a bit. I mean, obviously, Coors Field's going to take a lot of attraction off that. But if you removed Coors from this slate, I think the Braves would be a chalky stack. I do think people are going to want to target them versus Madison Bumgarner. And Bumgarner is actually given the most hard contact of any pitcher on the slate. And like you said, he's been better than what I thought he was going to be heading into the season. But that, like, it's still not saying too much. An xFIP close to 5, a sub 18% K rate, but just not giving up as much power as I thought he would. But the hard contact certainly there. And I'm going to give the advantage to the Braves offense here easily. I mean, Ronald Acuna is below 5K on DraftKings. I mean, that's pretty enticing. Dansby Swanson. I'm even fine with Matt Olson in a lefty on lefty spot because people are always scared to do that in tournaments, but I have no concern with that. So I'm definitely on the Braves here. Do I like them as much as the Los Angeles Dodgers? No, probably not. But once you factor in ownership, they're going to be much lower owned. Still getting some negative leverage over on the top stacks too, I believe. At, minus 4%, but it's not as bad as the Dodgers at least.
By the way, officially, while we were talking before, I bet the over 3.5 for Brian Bayo. DraftKings currently offers the best line on him at the 3.5 strikeout mark. Bet the over there. So that is officially locked in for today's slate. Other side of the game, Kyle Wright is going to be pitching for Atlanta against Arizona. And Wright's clearly having a breakout season, 3.79 expected ERA, 24.3% K rate, a former top prospect. It took him a while to really get his legs underneath him and figure out how to be successful at the big league level. But he's doing it this year. One thing that is maybe a little bit of a concern, his strikeout rate has slowly dipped over the course of the season. But with that said, he's still been excellent. I have no interest in stacking the Diamondbacks against him. The only thing I have to say here is a negative against Kyle Wright is there's a lot of pitching options to choose from. He's only projected for 1% ownership. You can make a case to be higher than that. But ultimately, I don't really think I'm going to end up getting to Kyle Wright. I just think there's other pitchers I'm going to prioritize.
Yeah, if you want to go overweight, if he's going to come in at 1%, it doesn't take much to be overweight. He's got the second most positive leverage on the slate, only behind Robbie Ray. But like you said, he's not going to be a priority for me. But if he's going to come in much lower than Shane Bieber is pulling in 20% ownership, I mean, Kyle Wright has some pretty solid numbers this year and some pretty similar numbers to Shane Bieber. So if you're just trying to play the ownership game, yeah, Kyle Wright's enticing, but I'm not super excited about him.
Yeah, it's one of those guys who Adam and I talk about this when we do the strategy show together. Is there'll be guys in the morning that are projected for 1% ownership, and it'll be like, all right, technically he's better odds of being in the optimal lineup than what the projections are, but still often guys that just don't end up making into our lineups by the time lock rolls around. I have a feeling that's where Kyle Wright is going to land for me. Yeah. Next game to hit on here, Houston Astros, Seattle Mariners, and this is a really good pitching matchup, at least on paper, where it's Justin Verlander against Robbie Ray. And I want to start by just talking about the Verlander side against the Mariners. Verlander has been good to a point that doesn't make any sense this year, is because he's 40 years old. He's coming off Tommy John surgery, hasn't pitched in 2 years, and he's pitching as well as he ever has. And, I don't expect this to completely keep up in terms of I don't think he's going to be a sub 2 ERA guy for the rest of the season, but he's clearly an elite starting pitcher in the Cy Young conversation. And in terms of the betting market, just slightly behind Shane McClanahan in terms of the favorite betting odds to win the AL Cy Young, at least per the betting odds. There's really only two guys in the mix. It's McClanahan and Verlander. But we've also got a whole lot of other high-end pitching options to pay up for. Is Verlander one of the guys you're looking to mix in? And how frequently would you like him to be in lineups in large field tournaments?
Yeah, I definitely think you have to mix him in. Looking at his numbers, he's about 40 years old, but he's not walking anybody below a 5% walk rate. The K rate's above 26%, very respectable 3.3 xFIP, and not giving up basically any power. Don't love the matchup versus Seattle, but at the same time, I don't love the matchup for Seattle versus Verlander. I definitely give the advantage to Verlander here in this spot. Pulling up his ownership, it looks like he's coming in about less than 15%, does have some positive leverage. So it's one of those things where if Garrett Cole is going to have 3 times the ownership as Justin Verlander, I'm going to start splitting that up because I don't think at the end of the day the projection should be that far off. So it makes sense to get to a lower on Verlander. If he's going to be around 13%, I think getting closer to 20% would be fine.
Yeah, and one site too where he really seems to make sense to me looking at our data is FanDuel. So single pitcher site, and just looking at some of the numbers right here, we have Garrett Cole projected with a 9% chance to be the top scoring pitcher on the slate. That's the best of the day. We've got Verlander only marginally behind him at 7%, yet the gap in ownership, 25% going to Cole, 3.5% to Verlander. So in particular on single pitcher sites where people are just paying up and getting to Garrett Cole, or they're just going cheaper at pitching and going to, whether it's Blake Snell at pitcher or Patrick Sandoval. Sandoval, like weirdly popular actually at 8,100. It's not even that cheap on FanDuel. He's projected for nearly 10% ownership. But I mean, I look at Verlander here, who is picking up less ownership than Shane Bieber at 10,600. That's crazy to me. Bieber double the ownership when he's only $500 less. Manoah is more popular. That I could understand because of the matchup, but I do think Verlander is going way overlooked on FanDuel. DK to an extent as well, but FanDuel, that ownership is really what stands out to me. And I know Randy Forth is saying that Cole is $100 less. $100 means nothing on FanDuel. The pricing also is so soft on FanDuel. It is on DK as well, but in a different way. But still, the $100 isn't going to make that much of a difference in terms of why people will be playing Cole 8x the amount they're playing Verlander.
Right. Yeah, FanDuel, you can always build whatever lineup you want. I always get on the app every single day. I'm just building lineups, and it's basically just building all-star lineups each and every single day. But yeah, I mean, on FanDuel, I don't think there's a reason for the ownership to be that insane. I didn't even realize it was 25% to Cole and only, what is it, 3% to Verlander, you said? Yeah, 3%. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of egregious. I don't know how to say the word, but egregious. I'm all for it. Yeah, egregious. But I'm all for it. I mean, Verlander and Cole, at the end of the day, the projection shouldn't be too far off. Do I prefer Cole in a vacuum? Sure. But at the same time, you have to factor in ownership for DFS. And I mean, obviously, I love the ownership on Verlander.
Yeah, cash games, the answer is Cole, but I do think particularly on FanDuel, there's pretty easy ways to differentiate there in tournaments. Starting for the Mariners, it's Robbie Ray, and he's been solid this year. He's shown strikeout upside 27.9%, which could always be favorable for fantasy purposes. But this is just not the same pitcher as he was a year. Well, actually, he kind of is the same pitcher he was a year ago. There's just way less luck involved with Robbie Ray this year than last year. I'm still a little triggered by what happened with Robbie Ray last year and the fact that he won the Cy Young and just had one of the luckiest years we've ever seen from a starting pitcher. It was the first time in baseball history that a starting pitcher had a strand rate over 90%. He did 90.1% strand rate. That's just very, very difficult to do. Of the hitters that got on base against him, 9 out of 10 were getting left on base. And that's really the only difference with his numbers this year to last year, is that he has a 78.3% strand rate. His strand rate normalized this year from last year, and that's the difference in between his ERA being 2.84 or 3.9. The strikeouts are more or less around the same, a little bit lower this year, but 28% is still a really strong number. But he's on the road. He's going up against the Houston Astros. There's a lot of pitchers to consider on the slate. So I can't really get to Robbie Ray despite the strikeout upside, but are you going to take any shots on him just because he does have the ability to swing and miss bats?
Yeah, and 150 max, he might filter in some lineups, but I mean, this is not a good spot versus the Astros. They're striking out less than 19% of the time versus lefties this year. Their walk rate's close to double digits, a 181 ISO, 108 WRC plus. Ray obviously has strikeout upside, but this is not the spot to chase strikeouts for Robbie Ray, in my opinion. And it's such a large slate. I would personally rather get to Kyle Wright, a softer spot versus Arizona. I'd rather get to Bieber. I'd rather get to Manoah. So I'm having a hard time seeing Ray get into too many of my lineups.
Yeah, and then I do wonder if people are going to ask about stacking against Robbie Ray, just because when he does get hit hard, he gets hit really hard. Like the bad starts for Robbie Ray go really wayward in a hurry. And in fact, his last start was him getting his ass kicked by the Houston Astros. The Astros do have a fairly decent team total, about 4.5 runs. They're only projected for 1% ownership today. I could see myself getting overweight to the field on the Astros and the 1% owned. I'm just kind of scrolling through the 1% owned offenses today, and I think they are my favorite offense that's picking up no ownership.
Yeah, I mean, the Rockies would be something I would consider because they're in Coors Field, but even then, I mean, the Astros are such a potent lineup, and yes, Robbie Ray is good, but like you said, when he gets hit, it just kind of unravels quickly. So yeah, I don't mind just a couple of Astro stacks for sure.
Yeah, so Astros, and I do get a little concerned the ownership could come up a little bit just because we just saw this matchup and Robbie Ray got obliterated. But still, a lot of options to consider on the slate. I think the most likely scenario is that the field doesn't gravitate towards them. So as long as the Astros are going to be 1% owned, that's going to be a 1% owned offense pick of the slate. Next spot to talk about, and it's another one that has a pretty interesting talking point because Lance Lynn has sucked this year. He has looked all kinds of washed up. Now, is his ERA actually going to be as high as it's been to this point? No, probably not, because he has an ERA of, 6.43 So his underlying numbers aren't good, but they're not quite that bad. 4.29 expected ERA. He also has a 4.34 FIP. One thing that has inflated his ERA is that Tony La Russa will just leave Lance Lynn in there forever. Like Lance Lynn will be there the seventh inning. He's throwing 110 pitches. His velocity is dropped. And Tony La Russa is like, cool, give us 30 more pitches. And Lance Lynn's arm is about to fall off and just gives up a whole bunch more runs. It's happened to him a couple times this year, most notably in a start against the Baltimore Orioles. But because he's at home against just the hapless Oakland A's offense, Lance Lynn is the most popular salary saving play on the slate. Over on FanDuel, he's projected for nearly 20% ownership at a sub 8K price point. Over on DraftKings, Lance Lynn is projected for 30% ownership at 6,800. It's a lot of ownership going to a pitcher that's struggling. So what are you going to do with Lance Lynn when you consider how good the matchup is?
Yeah, it's my concern here. I like the matchup, obviously, if you're looking at the A's numbers versus Rice this year, 24% K rate. They don't walk, they don't have power, and their WRC plus is currently sitting at 76. But man, Lance Lynn is not a pitcher I feel good about eating chalk on. Like there's so many other options on this slate where I don't really think you just kind of force yourself into Lance Lynn. Like, yes, the price point is nice, but on a one pitcher site like FanDuel, I'd feel pretty weary about having my one guy be Lance Lynn. I'd personally rather spend up a little bit. On DK, if you need a cheap SP2 in cash games, I'm fine with it. But if you have a chalky Dodgers stack and you're using a chalky guy like a Garrett Cole and you're playing tournaments, I mean, I would definitely not get to Lance Lynn. I'd try to find a cheaper SP2 option or a lower owned SP2 option there at a similar price point. I mean, obviously, the Vegas run total looks pretty good for Lynn. He's a decent favorite there and should be sitting around 4 to 6 strikeouts. But again, the ownership's the one thing that's going to concern me here.
I'm not going to say this is going to play out the same, but this reminds me of, because he started last night, Kikuchi started last night against the Tigers. Do you remember his start before that was against the Oakland A's? And Kikuchi's largely been terrible this year. He's been the least valuable pitcher in all of baseball per wins above replacement, worth about negative half a win for the year. And as much as he had sucked, he was pitching at home against the Oakland A's. So people were like, oh, let's just play a cheap Kikuchi with strikeout upside. And he ended up being like 40% owned on that slate. And if I remember correctly, he had 0 strikeouts and ended up giving up 5 runs and walked a whole bunch of guys. Right. I'm not saying that's going to be the exact result of Lance Lynn, but I do see some parallels between these two starts where it's just a struggling starting pitcher, bad offense. I don't want to play the Oakland A's in this spot. I don't think we need to on a slate of this size, but I don't want to play a 30% on Lance Lynn either, considering how much he struggled.
Yeah, the only way I'm going to get to Lance Lynn is cash games if I'm just trying to jam in Garrett Cole and the Dodgers. But I'm looking at the leverage on the top pitcher stool, and no one is currently worse than Lance Lynn, and I would probably have to agree with that. And 8% to be a top 2 pitcher, obviously value-wise, he's going to grade out well. But at the end of the day, raw points, is he going to be in the optimal lineup? I'd say probably not. I mean, people are just chasing the matchup versus Oakland, but at the same time, you got to remember Lance Lynn and who he is, and he's not the same pitcher he was back in the day.
No, and I mean, there's reasons for it as well. Lance Lynn is now 35 years old. He's clearly not far removed from being good. He was a Cy Young finalist in the American League last year. Robbie Ray won, Garrett Cole came in second, Lance Lynn came in third, and then Rodon was fourth, if I remember correctly. But he hurt his knee towards the tail end of the season. He had to have surgery in the offseason. Then he comes back. He has a late start. He gets lit up in spring. He was terrible in his minor league starts while he was rehabbing for the big leagues. And now he gets called up. And the thing that is really concerning to me when you consider all those factors, the age, and then also the knee surgery, his average fastball velocity was 94 miles per hour last year. It's 92.6 this year. And it's been a consistent downward trend. 2019, he was 94.7, then went 94.2, last year 94. Now he's down to 92.6. I just think he's peaked in terms of a pitcher. Now we're starting to see the downside of him. So I think that when it comes to Lance Lynn, a little bit over the hill. He's not going to maintain an ERA over 6 the rest of the year, but I don't want to play him when he's chalk. So if this ownership holds, I'll be taking Lance Lynn out of my player pool and just hope that he doesn't break the slate as a chalk pitching option when he's clearly struggled this year. And then pitching for Oakland is going to be James Kaprielian today. And another guy who's really struggled this year, expected ERA over 5, isn't generating swing and misses. The White Sox offense is almost never healthy, but they're also not picking up all that much ownership. They're at home. It's a hitter-friendly ballpark. And considering how much Kaprielian has struggled and the amount of contact he gives up, I think this is an offense to be overweight to at only 2% ownership.
Yeah, definitely not a bad stack here. I mean, his number is 5.35 xFIP this season, only 15.5% K rate, doesn't generate swings and misses. Double-digit walk rate as well, and around a 200 ISO given up. And obviously the White Sox aren't healthy completely, but you still have Tim Anderson, Makata, AJ Pollock, Jose Abreu, Eloy Jimenez, Yasmani Grandal. Like, it's still a lineup with plenty of pop here, close to a 5 implied run total. Looking at their ownership on the top stacks tool, you kind of have to scroll down a little bit to find them. Some slight positive leverage there, but if they're going to come in under 2 to 3% owned, it's not that hard to get overweight there for sure.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page with that one. White Sox, are they banged up? Sure, but Caprillian's no good, and this is really low ownership going to the White Sox. So a team worth being in the player pool while they're only 2% owned. The next game to talk about, this is a big one. The Los Angeles Dodgers team total north of 7 runs in Colorado against Chad Kuhl. Do you remember the last start that they had going against Chad Kuhl in Coors Field?
I actually rostered them quite heavily on that slate, and a complete game shutout, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was nearly a no-hitter for Chad Kuhl. Pulling up his game log in that spot, he ended up pitching 9 innings, 5 strikeouts, no walks, 3-hit shutout at Coors Field against the Dodgers. Probably one of the more unlikely starts of the entire season. And by the way, he's not gone past 5 innings in any start since that outing against the Dodgers. So go figure, but potential not potential. It is the same matchup today for him at home against the Dodgers. I'm going to go out on a limb and say he has less success in this start than he did in the last one. But with that said, how much do you want to play the Dodgers, and how are you going to handle them when they are projected for a whole bunch of ownership? Again, they're going to be in nearly 30% of the field's lineups, at least in our first run of ownership.
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to close to 30%. I'm looking at the top stacks tool, and their leverage isn't terrible for a team that's projecting close to 30% ownership. So I think that's just kind of some respect to how good of a spot the Dodgers are in today. But I mean, there's other great stacks in the slate, like the Yankees, the obviously Atlanta Braves, St. Louis Cardinals, the Brewers, the Blue Jays. So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to 30% ownership on the Dodgers, but I'm still probably going to get to at least 15, 20 plus, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get completely to the field. Because like I mentioned earlier, I'm more comfortable going overweight on chalky pitchers like a Garrett Cole than I am like a Dodgers. So I still like them, but not enough to be overweight in the field probably.
Brian Bayo just got scratched. So I have one baseball bet of the day so far, and now it's not existent anymore. So there we go. It was a real, what I thought I found a really nice, good start to the day. One of the more positive ROI bets we had in Odd Shopper. There we go. It got canceled. I found that it got canceled over the course of about 25 minutes here. So there that one goes. No new starting pitcher listed for the Boston Red Sox. That'll be a spot where we'll have more information on it later on the day in terms of what this is going to mean for the Brewers offense and then ownership as well. But it's just hard to know right now. We don't know who's starting for the Red Sox. So once again, guys, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and check out all our content later on in the day for updates on that situation, at least at this point in time. We did have the Brewers as the team with the second highest top stack odds on the slate behind the Los Angeles Dodgers, and that could be something that potentially changes now. But anyway, Dodgers clearly a key talking point on the slate. He said that you're not going to outright fade them. You're probably going to come in underweight to the field on them, which I think there's a pretty good chance that's what I will be doing as well on a slate of this size if the ownership holds true. But is there any way that you see to reduce the ownership share of Dodger stacks, whether it's with certain low-owned pitchers or rostering guys at the tail end of the lineup? I know yesterday my single entry stack, it was a 5-man Dodger stack, and then I ran it back with 3 lower-owned Tigers players, and one of them happened to be Willie Castro. We had a home run. So there was reasonable ways to play the Dodgers at lower ownership yesterday. Do you see any of those routes today where you look at the Dodgers and be like, okay, they're really popular, but this is a way to make my lineup somewhat unique or contrarian with Dodgers in it?
Yeah, there's certainly ways to do that. I mean, the simplest thing you can do is just go with the bottom half of the order stack with Gavin Lux, potentially Justin Turner, Max Muncy, Cody Bellinger. But if you want to get the prime parts of the order with Mookie Betts, Trey Turner, Freddie Freeman, Will Smith, instead of rostering guys like Garrett Cole and Lance Lynn together, you could go with an Alec Manoah and a Kyle Wright mixture or something like that. So there's ways to play chalk and still get off of it a little bit to make your lineups at least a little bit different. Or if you want to throw in Robbie Ray in your Dodgers stack, which won't feel comfortable, but it gets you off a completely chalky build. So yeah, plenty of paths to do that. And obviously everyone's going to try to do the same thing with Garrett Cole, Lance Lynn, and load up the Dodgers. You're going to have to find ways to be a little bit different than that. And there's certainly ways to do that with some lower owned pitchers who, well, they might not be in the best spots, but they have plenty of upside as well.
Looks like it is going to be a bullpen game for the Red Sox. Austin Davis has been named the starter. All the lines are down for that game now. I just think it's funny that all the lines come down to the point where Brandon Woodruff's strikeout prop has come down because the books just hold that. Like, I guess they just press a button and it takes down the game as an entirety. But There's no reason that Austin Davis and the Red Sox going to the bullpen game would have any impact on the over-under for Brandon Woodruff's strikeouts, but also that is currently off the board. And then on the other side of the game, Julio Urias is going to be on the mound for the Dodgers. I know earlier you had mentioned that you could potentially have some interest in the Rockies as being a 1% owned stack. I don't know that I'm going to go there against Urias, although I'm not willing to play Urias in this spot either. There's been times that I have played him at Coors Field. I remember a start this year. I'm fairly sure this year, actually, that, by the way, Bayo will be available to pitch out of the bullpen today. So some sort of weird pitching rotation the Red Sox going. Maybe it's Austin Davis pitches the first inning, then Bayo will come out and pitch second, third, fourth, fifth innings or something. But who's to say? Need more information at this point. But Urias going up against the Rockies offense. Are you going to play Urias at all? And are the Rockies a team that you ultimately think you will be getting to?
I'm probably not going to get to him personally. I just don't think the upside is going to be there compared to some of these other pitchers. Obviously, pitching in Coors, 24% strikeout guy for close to $10,000 in Coors Field. Like, he's not a bad pitcher by any means. He's perfectly fine, but you take him in Coors Field, it's just definitely going to kind of negate my interest on him. So it's kind of a cross off for me. And the Rockies, the only way I'd have interest here is because of how low owned they are. They're currently sitting at below 1%, and it's Coors Field. So obviously anything can happen there. But even then, you got to give a lot of respect to Urias because of, I mean, he's a fine pitcher, 24% strikeout rate, doesn't walk many guys, only 1% walk rate to lefties so far this season. But if you want to get to a couple of the righties as a one-off at lower ownership, like CJ Croney's been mashing left-handed pitching this season. And obviously Chris Bryant, Connor Joe, not really a power guy, but plenty of contact. So it's fine for a mini stack in tournaments, but as far as like a single entry build or cash games, I'm not going to get to any of the Rockies.
3 games left to talk about, and now we have to hit on some of these West Coast games to close out the slate. And this one here, the Los Angeles Angels at home against the Texas Rangers. Martin Perez has had a solid year, although he has kind of started to lose a little bit of the effectiveness that he had earlier in the season. He was good in his last start, but it was against the Oakland A's. So like, what do we pull from that? A lot of pitchers do end up having success against the Oakland A's. The Angels offense has been fairly miserable without Mike Trout. There's been a lot of strikeouts to be had. Martin Perez, typically not a strikeout pitcher, 20.8% K rate, but considering that the Angels have been a really popular target for opposing pitchers in DFS as of late, how are you going to handle Martin Perez in this spot?
Yeah, he's not usually a pitcher I like to roster too much because the strikeout upside isn't as high as I'd like it to be, but facing the Angels, currently 24% K rate versus left-handed pitching this season, they have been striking out a little bit more versus righties. But Perez, I wish the price was a little bit lower. I mean, 20.8% K rate's fine, 3.7 xFIP's fine, doesn't walk too many guys and doesn't give up any power, but I think he's a better real-life pitcher, especially so far this season than he is for DFS. So I'm probably not going to get to too much Perez. He might filter in a few lineups here and there for 150 max, but I'm not super excited about him.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. Martin Perez, reasonable price point on DK at 8,400. FanDuel, I think that is a little bit more of a stretch for me because he's 9,600 and it's a single pitcher site. It's going to be hard. Like if I have a choice between Martin Perez at 9,600, say like Alek Manoah 10,200, it's just going to pretty easily be Manoah for me, especially when Manoah is also low owned. So I can't consider Perez on FanDuel. On DK, just because of the matchup and low ownership, I think he's a rosterable SP2 option, reasonable price point, good matchup. I have no interest in stacking the Angels against him, though.
Oh, me either. I'm definitely crossing off the Angels for me for stack. I mean, outside of, there's not really many bats you'd want to get to outside of Ohtani, like maybe Taylor Ward versus a lefty, but outside of those two guys, it's pretty dead. And
then Patrick Sandoval starting for the Angels, I'm confused by his ownership because he's fairly popular on DK. He's projected for 17% ownership at $7,700. Over on FanDuel, where he's priced all the way up to $8,800, he's projected for 8% ownership. I'm kind of confused why the field is going here to such an extent, because it's not that Sandoval has been bad this year, but he's been pretty mediocre. 4.54 expected ERA, 21.1% K rate. I think he's overpriced on FanDuel. I just don't have interest in him as long as the field is getting here at a decent clip.
Yeah, I was kind of confused about the ownership as well. I mean, he did have that 110 strikeout game versus Baltimore, and he struck out 9 versus Houston. But even then, the ownership he's getting to, it's not really that appealing to me. So I'm pretty comfortable being underweight on him. I will say he's not giving much power at all this year, and the 24% K rate's fine for a guy that's below $8,000. But I'm not going to go on my way to play Sandoval.
Yeah, not only I'm going to go out of my way to not play him at this
Right.
point. Like if he's actually going to be, around 20% owned on DraftKings, 10% owned on FanDuel, I'm cool with just going in Fantasy Cruncher and deselecting his name. Doesn't mean I want to stack the Rangers, especially because Corey Seager's hurt right now. But Sandoval, just a lot of pitching options to get on the slate, and he's a pretty mediocre one. So I'll look elsewhere as far as my pitchers go. Next game to talk about here, San Diego Padres against the Minnesota Twins. Blake's now picking up some ownership today, and a lot of it has to do because of his strikeout upside. It's the 3.6 expected ERA, decent while not great, but then a 29.1% K rate for Blake's. Now, he is projected for 13% ownership over on FanDuel. On DK, we've got Snell projected for 20% ownership at 8,300. He is really similar price and ownership numbers to Patrick Sandoval. If I have to roster one of these guys, I'd prefer to go to Blake Snell just because I think he's better. I think there's a lot higher of a ceiling for him in terms of the strikeout stuff. Clearly, he's been inconsistent over the course of the year and a half that he spent in San Diego, but there's still a ceiling there. So I'm probably going to be underweight to the field on Blake Snell, but he's going to be in my player pool for sure.
Yeah, I do like Blake Snell to a degree. It's never fun rostering the guy because whenever you roster Blake Snell, man, I swear he walks half the team. It's never a fun experience, but the strikeout upside is there, close to 30% this season, but a 13.5% walk rate, but not giving up too much power as far as home runs are concerned, but the hard contact rate is one of the highest on the entire slate. Outside of Byron Buxton, though, I think Blake Snell can pretty much navigate through this lineup fine. And at $8,300, he's definitely an intriguing SP2.
Yeah, we're on the same page there. And then, like I said, there has been some inconsistencies with him. So I'm not going to deny that there's a little bit of upside in the Twins, although I don't think it's a team that ultimately makes it into my player pool or a team I'm looking to stack. But if Snell's ownership creeps up a little bit, would the Twins be a team you consider for some leverage?
Not much ownership in my exposures, but I think it'd be worth getting to a little bit if Blake Snell is going to be chalky. Because I mean, whenever Blake Snell is chalk, there's always an advantage to be had going against the other team.
And then we've got Joe Ryan pitching for the Twins, and at least right now in chat, Blitz just mentioned that she's kind of considering eyeing Joe Ryan today. And Joe Ryan, he did get off to a really good start to the year, and his numbers are good overall: 3.35 expected ERA, 22.3% K rate. The Padres offense, they got off to a good start to the year despite missing Fernando Tatis, but things have not been as great for them as of late, and a team that's really struggled to score runs. So Joe Ryan, I think he's good enough to where I'm not going to stack the San Diego Padres at all, but I don't know that I'm going to play Joe Ryan either. It's just a lot of pitching options on the slate, a lot of high-end pitching options. He's $8,700 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's same exact price. I was looking back and forth. I thought I had something mixed up because I saw 8,700 twice, but just same price on both sites. No interest for me. I don't want to stack the Padres. I want to play Joe Ryan. Is it any different for you?
Yeah, it's kind of a cross up for me. I'd want a little bit more, like, better numbers from him this season at that price point, close to $9,000. I mean, we're talking about an xFIP about 4.5 this year, low 20s K rate, and a 55% fly ball rate as well. Like, I'd rather get the Shane Bieber, even though he's going to have more ownership. There's so many other pitchers on the slate where Joe Ryan's not a guy that I'm going to just try to hammer my lineups. He'll probably get filtered out.
All right, final spot on the slate, and this is one where I'm struggling to really find too much interest in anything. Giants at home against the Cubs. Alex Cobb has really good numbers for the year, a 2.88 expected ERA, 22.8% K rate. Actually, at one point early in the year, he had like a 28% K rate and then just hasn't really generated the strikeouts as of late. But he's also $8,300 over on FanDuel. On DK, we've got Alex Cobb, actually $6,700. I think that's a serviceable, cheap option. So I'll run this back a little bit. I thought that Alex Cobb wasn't going to be a pitcher I liked at all, but at $6,700, I think I could be talked into him. I'd rather play Alex Cobb at $6,700 at 14% ownership than Lance Lynn at $6,800 at 30% ownership. Do you like Alex Cobb as an SP2 option on DraftKings when his price is so low?
Yeah, I was just about to ask you what you mentioned. I was like, would you rather play Alex Cobb or Lance Lynn? And I think the easy answer there, especially once you factor in ownership, is Alex Cobb. Like, Cobb doesn't have terrible numbers this year. He doesn't allow any power, 61% ground ball rate, only a 23% hard contact rate, and half a homer allowed per nine. In the Cubs lineup, there's definitely strikeouts to be had. I mean, Cobb's not a huge strikeout guy so far this season, sitting at 23%. But I mean, at $6,700, you don't need much. It's a pitcher-friendly park in San Francisco. I mean, he's definitely a great pivot off of Lance Lynn. Like we were talking earlier, where if you want to play the Dodgers, you have to try to find some lower owned plays. Instead of playing Lance Lynn as your SP2, maybe just get to Alex Cobb instead.
Yeah, I do think that makes sense. Because I mean, we're on the same page. I prefer Cobb. I prefer Cobb to Lynn for sure. And actually, our projections too. We have Alex Cobb as a better with a better projection. We have him with higher odds of being a top value pitcher and a top scoring pitcher on the slate. And yet Lance Lynn has doubled the ownership. So yeah, between the two of them, I would prefer to get to Alex Cobb. I think that does make sense as we talk through it. Cubs, no real interest there. Marcus Stroman, I don't want to roster him against the Giants, but Stroman also a pitcher who's generally much better in real life than he is in fantasy, doesn't really generate all that many strikeouts. The Giants as an offense, they're a total headache for DFS because of how often they pinch hit. So this is another spot to me. No interest in Stroman and no interest in stacking against him.
Yeah, Stroman kind of reminds me of Michaelis, where he's a pitcher where I don't want to roster for DFS, but I also don't want to stack against him, especially with an annoying team like San Francisco, because you're going to lose half your lineup every single time you stack them as well. So I'm pretty much just Alex Cobb in this game, and I can cross just about everything else off.
Yeah, and then one final thing, because Randy Forrest said easier to bet unders on Bayo now. No, because if he doesn't start, the bets get voided and he's not starting. So like my ticket's just going to getting refunded on that. And there's not going to be prop lines that are available at all going forward the rest of the day. So the Brian Bayo bet just doesn't exist anymore, basically deleted from existence. But that brings us to the end of the show. Good hanging out with Chris. First time the two of us have done a show together. Hopefully we'll be on the schedule for a couple more of them going forward. Other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and good luck with the slate today.